Hey team, Astrologaster is an historical comedic choose-your-own-adventure style game that follows the life and work of Simon Forman, Doctor of Astrology and Medicine. Forman practiced in and around the city of London at around the turn of the 17th century, and the game follows his career as he seeks to achieve a medical license granted to him in the game through the accumulation of several letters of recommendation through his clients that you see throughout the course of the game. Many of the clients are based off of actual historical people that Forman worked with during his time practicing, while others are just kind of made up for the game itself. In truth, Astrologaster is something that first came on my radar pretty soon after its release in the spring of 2019, but I just sort of avoided it out of like a sense of existential dread, just knowing that astrology generally is not very well depicted in media at all, and especially not in video games. I still, to this day, believe that Final Fantasy X is probably the best video game depiction of astrological principles. I'm not even 100% sure that that was really intentional on the developer's part. But knowing, that astrology tends to get a bad rap and is depicted not very well in video games, and then, a video game depicting Simon Forman's life, who himself is kind of a notorious, controversial character to talk about, who my cat is kind of, this is... That is how Simon Forman is typically regarded in media. So not even just the astrology being a difficult thing to depict, and not even just Simon Forman being himself a controversial character, but also the type of astrology that's being explored, medical astrology, which is way more complicated and technically advanced, just seemed like a thing that is best that I avoided. And I was kind of content to just let it go by until I had a friend recommend it to me some months ago after having seen another friend of his play the game on a stream. And when I kind of voiced my concerns about it, his comment was that I would probably appreciate the game, which set off like a whole bunch of alarms. But some weeks ago I did sit down and actually play the game and finish it. And so these are my thoughts in Astrologer Reviews Astrologaster. So in moving forward with this, I know that it's very easy for me to get very hypercritical about things, especially things that depict astrology and being completely historically accurate, which I know is not the point of this game really. So we're going to kind of do like the criticism sandwich technique. We're going to do like good thing, bad thing, good thing, bad thing, good thing. It's going to just be like a multi-tiered sandwich. But it's actually mostly good, I think, even though I think some of the criticisms are a little bit strong and may overshadow some of the good. There is more good in the game, I think, in general. So first thing, good thing. The music was great. The music was really amazing. In my notes, I put jaunty tune and like a smiley face because each character is introduced with kind of a theme. Each character has a theme that they kind of keep throughout the story, and they sing a verse about the character that's of course updated after different times that you see them. And they're all very unique. They're all very original, and a lot of the verses are actually very humorous. And I really enjoyed the music. Apparently, the music was nominated for several awards. I don't think it won any. If it didn't, it was robbed. But so even other people thought that the music was very good too. It was very highly regarded for its music. Definitely great. Bad thing is that it suffers from inaccurate terminology in places, particularly in regards to the astrology itself. For instance, all throughout the game, it refers to signs of the zodiac as zodiacs. So the game will tell you like select a zodiac. And it'll give like, Aries, Gemini, or Virgo, and it'll be like, select a zodiac. It's like, no, those are signs, not zodiacs. Like, those are different things. And then in some of its other terminology, like there's a part where it says that Mars is exalted in Scorpio. It's not. Mars is exalted in Capricorn. So things like that. They're just like little things like that that could have been cleaned up, that as an astrologer are like, ugh, it's like the thing. It's like the nails on a chalkboard. It's like, ugh, okay. Good thing. Pop-up book style graphics I thought were a really neat and unique idea. So they're very nice to look at. And it's a very, like I said, it's a very unique idea, very unique storytelling device, and it feels like a story, of course, because it's like a choose your own adventure kind of thing. So it feels like a story, and the graphics kind of visually depict a story, which is awesome. The only downside is that it suffers from a lack of diversity, in that there's only like 5 or 6 different backgrounds for the pop-up book thing. But the pop-up book aspect of it is also utilized in different respects to like emphasize different things. Like there are instances where characters are upset or excited and they kind of rush out the door and slam it behind them, and it's depicted by the pop-up just falling down. Which I thought was, that's fun. That's good. So bad thing, kind of a big bad thing, or like a bad thing that could have been easily fixed, kind of like the bad terminology. is that there are some historical anachronisms when it comes to the astrology involved. Primarily, the inclusion of the outer planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto are included in a lot of the charts. And this is a big deal because Simon Forman passed away in 1611, and Uranus wasn't discovered until 1781, so he had no idea that these planets were there, and to have them kind of included in the charts is weird, kind of a weird decision. So good thing, bad thing at the same time. Overall, it does a really great job of teaching the humoral and Greek medical associations for disease manifestations. So it's really nice to see and kind of be walked through what it means when there's like an abundance of blood in somebody's system, like what manifestations of disease that might look like, what symptoms might happen, things like that. But there are a couple of instances where it ends up being wrong, such as at one point it says that melancholy is associated with diabetes, which isn't right. And then there's another instance which is kind of big, but I understand where it went wrong, in that it miscounts a character's quartan fever. To where it's basically like a 5-day fever instead of a fever every 4th day, based on how they're counting it. So just little things like that could have been cleaned up, I think, but overall, it's really good and it's very accurate. 2 good things, back to back. Characters in the game. All the characters are really good, I think. There's one character in particular that I personally enjoyed. A very minor character, Widow McDoon, who is accused by her neighbors of being a witch, said to be cursing people who kick our cats. An icon, in my opinion, so good job for her. And then another character, a more major character in the game, Humphrey Bell, his voice actor, the way that his voice actor talks, the cadence of it, I guess kind of coupled with the accent, makes him sound like a Gungan from Star Wars, like Jar Jar Binks from The Phantom Menace, which I love. I thought it was, I'm not sure if they told him, like, yes, more Jar Jar, or like what exactly the direction was there, but I loved it. I thought it was really funny, and I wish that it's a shame that Humphrey Bell comes so late in the game. It would have been nice to have him more throughout, but it was really nice to hear Gungan kind of pop up in and out of the story. Another good thing is that the historical stuff going on in the story tends to be very accurate and is very good, such as like Simon Forman's issues with the College of Physicians, which start kind of by him. By a patient of his dying after taking a remedy of his, which is a thing that happens in the game, and you kind of get to explore the different ramifications of that, which is good. And then a lot of kind of the historical events that are happening in and around England at the time of his life are explored kind of in the background, or kind of, he's not directly involved in it, but he sometimes interacts with people who are and gives them counsel and things like that. So a lot of that is very good, and it's very nice to kind of see, it's in a historical type game, so it's nice to see like accurate history be thrown in as well. Very nice. Another good thing, we kind of like stacking several good things back to back, because my final criticisms are actually kind of big things that I think are worth exploring a little bit more. So throughout the game, the College of Physicians is sort of like the big bad against Foreman. They're trying to, find him or imprison him for practicing medicine without a license, which is something I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. And during this process, when you're called in during the game, he's given an examination, which is something that he had to do at least once throughout his life. And the examination is done as like a quiz for the player to take, which I thought was really fun to do, like a really neat idea. And it's just sort of like the game teaches you what you need to know to be able to answer it. And all the answers are accurate. The questions they ask, the answers are correct. And it's really nice, but it's just very short. Like, it's like 4 questions and you do it twice, so you end up answering like 8 questions all in all. It would have been nice to have that like a little bit longer, I guess, but maybe that's just me, being like the astrologer wanting to be quizzed a bit. But the inclusion of it was very nice. It would have been nice to have it be a little bit longer. So kind of like a bigger bad thing that's more systemic throughout the game is that you're not actually doing astrology when you're playing the game, because of course you're not, just obviously, and this is something that I have to remember, like as an astrologer, you're not actually doing the astrology. And so what ends up happening is you're guessing, like you're choosing between a couple of different options, 2 or 3 different options about what you want to tell the client. And some of it's kind of based off of astrological placements, and some of them are actually very clever. But others of them it's more like guessing. Like, you just have this chart, you only look at pieces of it, and you kind of lack the ability to determine what parts of it are more or less important, like what parts of it to emphasize, what is like the correct answer, like what answer gets you to the best ending. And so that's kind of like a downer, I guess. It would have been nicer to have like the full chart up, and just be able to walk through it like that. It would have been kind of neater if the game had kind of work to teach you, I guess, a little bit more about like astrological technique, even though that I know that is way beyond the scope of what the game was trying to accomplish. But it's just kind of weird, I guess, to go into it with this idea of like, oh, we're going to talk about and do like astrology things. Like that's kind of neat. Like I'm going to look at charts and be able to give advice based on it. Obviously limited game options and things like that. But to have that to be like so limited to the point where you can't even really use astrology to pick what the best options are, or what options you might want to say, and you just kind of choose pieces of it to tell them. Was kind of a letdown, I guess, and it kind of made me want to stop playing after a bit, because it really just kind of seemed like I was more guessing about what I thought I should say rather than like what the chart was trying to tell me to say. Like I was trying to approach it more like a consultation, which is not what the game was trying to do, and it was just like very jarring, I guess. So that's kind of the downside, I guess. Like there's not actual like astrology in it. It's not teaching you or kind of encouraging you to walk through a chart to arrive at a conclusion. It's just like pick one of these three options. They're all equally likely to happen in most cases, and there you go. Sort of another result of that, in order to get a lot of those best answers, a lot of those best cases, because you're not actually using, like an astrology chart to determine information as viable or unviable or anything like that, you end up relying a lot on knowledge of, what the person tells you, which is fine, or being aware of what kind of historical things are happening in that time and what's going to happen, or information that other characters give you about other characters, to be able to figure out what the best option is, or be able to make accurate predictions or give accurate advice. Yep. So because of that, because you're not, actually being an astrologer, which is fine, it's a game, and because you're relying on all of this background information, it kind of depicts horary astrology as like cold reading. In my opinion, like that's kind of what I got out of it, which wasn't really what I wanted to get out of it. But it's almost like, oh, the only reason that you're able to give these really accurate predictions is because you already know what's happening with these characters, because characters will ask about people in their lives, but then those people in their lives are actually people that you've had consultations with, so you are privy to the information. And then it's like, do I tell them this? Like, what information do I give them based on that? So it's a little kind of like, it's a little sus about how it goes. So I wasn't a huge fan of how it ended up being depicted in a lot of instances, but I understand that that's like a limitation of the information in the game, but it just kind of it left a bad taste in my mouth a little bit. So good thing that I actually liked a lot was that it does spend a little bit of time talking about, it spends a good amount of time talking about some of the difficulties that women faced in historical England, some of the issues that they faced, and some of like the weird marriage laws and things like that, especially when it comes to debts, which I thought was nice. Another thing that it tackled is it does spend a little bit of time talking about what made Foreman's medical methods different or kind of odd compared to his contemporaries. One sort of myth or misconception that I often have to kind of tackle as somebody who teaches courses on medical astrology is this idea that like, oh, to be a doctor, historically, you had to be an astrologer. To not be an astrologer was unheard of, and that's not actually true. There's this very big sense within astrology in general that being an astrologer doctor was the majority of doctors, while those who did not practice astrology alongside their medicine were like the minority and kind of weird, like a weird friend group. And that's not true. It's actually kind of reversed in a lot of ways. There are certain medical techniques that are talked about in relation to astrology, like purging certain humors, and that's something that like a lot of doctors did. Like that was the astrology that was typically practiced. So I guess like yes, technically, but to like use an actual like horary figure to diagnose illnesses, which is what Foreman did, and not use more conventional diagnostic procedures, was weird. And that was kind of why Foreman was looked at kind of suspiciously, because he took his astrology almost like his astrology was basically what he used to diagnose. He didn't use other options or other methods, which the kind of medical establishment thought was weird, and was part of why he was kind of painted as a quack. One thing that the game didn't talk about, I don't think at all, that I think is actually much more important, was the lack of access to healthcare in 17th century England. So around the time that Foreman was practicing, around, we'll say 1600, he died in 1611, but he was kind of more, his work was mostly from like 1580-ish to, before he passed. And the City of London had a population of 200,000, but the College of Physicians, which is the body that licensed doctors to be able to practice within the City of London, it was supposed to be used to help ensure that the people of London had access to healthcare, had access to qualified doctors who, had an education and were tested, and you knew that they were tested and they were good because they had this license to practice. But what actually ended up happening was the College of Physicians became like this elite thing. So, I said before that the City of London at around 1600 had about 200,000 residents. There were only 30 doctors licensed by the college to practice in Foreman's lifetime. Only 30 that could practice. So, you do the math on that about why people had to go to people like Foreman, why people had to go to cunning folk for medicine, why people had to go to midwives for medicine who were unlicensed because they just didn't have access to healthcare. It's not too dissimilar today. Of course, being poor was another thing that held a lot of people back from access to healthcare. A college licensed doctor costs a lot of money, and so we kind of still, we still have that issue today. We have much more doctors, we'll say, per capita than 17th century England did, but access to healthcare, especially in places that do not have socialized medicine, is still a very big issue. So that I thought it was weird to have a game that was about Foreman's life not mention that, and how how what he was doing while not licensed by the college was not necessarily it's not the same as it would be if somebody practicing medicine unlicensed today. There are very different kind of cultural and healthcare access reasons why that was more okay than it is today. So my final kind of good bad thing, I guess, is that all of the charts that it references in in the game's consultations, anytime you have a consultation with one of the clients and you're deciding kind of what to tell them, that chart is a real chart. That chart is a real astrological chart based on a moment in time, which I thought was fascinating and fantastic and a great idea. The bad side was, the downside, the thing I didn't like, was that you don't find out the chart information, you don't find out the date, time, and you don't find out the date and time until after it's happened, until after you've selected your option and the consultation is closing. I wanted to cheat. I'll be honest, I wanted to go and pull up that chart, the full chart, look at it all, and see kind of what I could get from it. That's what I wanted to do with it. But the game did not let me do that, which was unfortunate. But one thing that I found that confused me, and it was actually very late in the game that I figured out that this was happening. It was halfway through my playthrough that I realized that the charts were real and that the information that it was giving me was accurate. That the charts, the pieces that it was pulling out, were actually placements in the real charts at the time, which was fascinating, which was super cool. So I didn't figure that out until much later. So it took me a little bit to realize that the charts were based on actual charts and that I could see, the actual positions of the planets and stuff. But when I started to look at them, I started to notice discrepancies in planetary placements, particularly the moon sign. And it wasn't just a little bit, it was a lot. There was one instance where it was saying that the moon was conjoined Mercury in Aquarius, and then when I pulled it up, the moon was actually in Gemini. And I was like, well, that's weird, what's happening? Because everything else is more or less right, as far as signs and house positions that it gives you. And so I started looking into it, and I realized that they were kind of doing another kind of historical anachronism, in that they were using the Gregorian calendar for the dates instead of the Julian calendar for the dates. So that was weird, because the Gregorian calendar wasn't adopted until 1752, and, Foreman passed almost 150 years before that. So it was weird to have them using Gregorian calendar dates for things that were recorded. We suppose if these are charts that are being pulled out of Simon Foreman's casebook, specifically for the individuals who the real historical characters that he did see that we meet in the game, that the charts would be different. So I'm not sure to what degree they really focused on making the charts accurate to what Foreman reported to us, or what he recorded, because his handwriting is crazy. But I thought that was a weird thing to do. But kind of my last point, and the good thing was that I thought it ended very well. I thought it ended very nicely. So, like, at the end of the game, Foreman asks a horary question about what he'll be remembered for after he dies, and you have, your 3 options to pick from, and all 3 options are actually true. They're all things that he was known for, or that he became known for after he passed. And it was just like a really nice way to, I guess, just kind of wrap up the story, and have, like, all of these things are true. All of these things are what he was remembered for, at different times of his life. Or I'm sorry, not different times of his life, but at different times after he passed, as we kind of learned more about him and things like that. Because initially he was remembered for very bad things, and now, as we've gotten more distance from it and been able to look more into his casebooks, the opinion of him has kind of changed overall, like what he contributed to the history of astrology and the history of medicine, things like that. So overall, very good. So overall, what did I think about the game? I actually really enjoyed it. I recommend it. I would love to see like a sequel or some kind of like add-on that does like more advanced astrological technique, like to kind of teach and walk through things. That would be like a really neat resource to have that to include in a medical astrology course. So that would be really fun to see. But overall, I thought it was really enjoyable, really fun to play. It's kind of shortish, which is a downside as well, maybe about like 8-ish hours. But it's available on Steam. I definitely recommend going and checking it out, and I would love to see more astrology video games, even if they're not always super awesome. So there you have it, an astrologer's review of Astrologaster. Go and pick it up.